Welcome back to the monthly edition of the PigX podcast. I'm your host, Delaney Howell. Today's conversation focuses on swine mortality, specifically the data behind it and how producers can use that information to drive better outcomes. In this episode, we'll hear what the data is telling us from both high and low mortality farms, drawing from U.S. and international perspectives alike. Following the recent International Conference on Pig Livability, I spoke with Rachel Johnson, Technical Account and Production Support Lead at MetaFarms, who shares insights from a U.S. data standpoint. We were also joined by Dr. Derald Holtkamp, professor at Iowa State University, who provides a global perspective. Together, we discuss what the data tells us, how to quantify the magnitude of the challenge, year-over-year trends, ways productivity is being measured, and ideas for continued progress forward. Let's start with why our guests believed swine mortality was such a key topic at the conference and why it continues to be a focus in swine production today.
Topic of the conference, right? You don't have many of these conferences where it's for a very specific problem, right? At least I don't attend a lot of those. And so this is a bit unique in that it is focused really on just pig survivability, right? And so I think that what we tried to do is put some numbers around the magnitude of that problem, right? So I think most of the listeners and certainly all of the attendees at this conference would probably agree we have a problem, right? There's very few seats were open. And so to me, it says that yes, I think there is a perception that it's a big problem. But so what we tried to do, Rachel and I tried to put some numbers around that. And I did that from an international perspective, and Rachel did it from the U.S. perspective. And yeah, so it's, I guess in a nutshell, it's big numbers, right? And I think it is a substantial problem and worth spending a couple days to talk about it here.
Right, I would agree. I think we all know that it's a problem, but I think it was good to kind of kick off the conference with just what is the reality of the situation in the industry, both globally and domestically, of where have we been and where are we going, and what areas can we improve upon, and where have we improved. So I think it was a good way to get started.
Great. So let's start by, you each looked at yearly data. So Dr. Holtkamp, let's start with you first, and a little bit of your presentation. You really focused on the year 2023. Was there a reason you picked that year in particular?
There was. That's the last year that we have complete data and the analysis completed for. So the data that I presented was from a project called the Global Swine Benchmarking Project. It's a project funded by MSD Animal Health or Merck Animal Health here in the U.S. And it's a project that I've collaborated on with a couple ag economists from Iowa State, Lee Schultz and Dermot Hayes. Both of them now have moved on. Dermot recently retired, and Lee accepted a position at Everag here. But they continue to be involved in the project. And since 2018, that was the first year we did the analysis. But since 2018, once a year we publish an update to that. And the primary data source that we work with is from a group called Interpig, and it's primarily ag economists and some others from countries in the Americas and Europe. And then we also work with MSD to get some data for countries in Asia as well for that. But by the time we get the data together, and so we're talking now, we're in October 2025, we are currently just working on getting all the data for 2024 together. So it takes a while to get that together, and then we have to complete the analysis. So we tend to be about a year behind. And so just because of the timing of this conference, it's almost 2 years now before we could present that. We're actually working on a project where we're going to update that more currently, well, at least for some of the market sensitive values like market pig prices and feed prices. We'll have those updated on a quarterly basis, and Everag is working with us on that project where we'll be able to then publish 4 to 6 weeks after the end of the quarter a current update. Then that'll be a little bit more real time, let's call it. So.
Great. And so the trends that you were looking at in 2023 looked at a variety of factors, but the three most important were market pig prices, feed, and productivity. Walk us through the trends that you were looking at and why those three in particular were most important.
Yeah, so one of the analyses that we do every year is what we describe it as a factor analysis. And we are trying to sort out what are the factors that gave producers in each country a relative competitive advantage or disadvantage in terms of their profitability for that year, right? And so market pig prices, of course, is one, feed prices, and productivity. We look at all the productivity measures that we collect from breed to market. So we combine those as one. But what we do for that is we start by calculating a simple average for all the values for across all the countries. And then we give every country those same values. So they're essentially all starting at the same start line. And then for one factor at a time, we let each country have its own values for just that factor. And then we see how much difference that makes for profitability. And so, not surprisingly, market pig prices, feed prices contribute a lot from year to year to the relative profitability of countries in our data set. The one that I guess maybe surprised me a little bit, might surprise some of your listeners, was that productivity is right up there with that. And what that suggests is there's a fair amount of variation from country to country in the overall productivity of producers. And then that the economic value of that is high as well, right? And so that was really what I focused on here today was trying to put a value, an economic value on what that difference in productivity makes, and I focused on the U.S. versus Brazil.
Yeah, how would you define productivity, just to clarify?
Mm-hmm. So part of the data that we collect, it's both production and financial data. So we get the typical measures like born alive per litter, farrow, then pre-wean mortality, and nursery mortality and finisher mortality, nursery average daily gain, finisher average daily gain, and so forth. So all the typical productivity indicators or measures that we usually use are included in our model. And so when we do that assessment of productivity, we let each country have its own values for all of those, right, from breed to market. And so it is a look at the overall productivity, not strictly mortality, not strictly the nursery phase or finishing phase. It's breed to market. So
you obviously looked at MetaFarm. You pulled MetaFarm data to look at sow mortality rate, wean to finish, a couple other phases of production. Sure. How does the data you pulled and some of the analysis that you did compare to what Dr. Holtkamp and his team have done at Iowa State?
Sure. Very similar approach, but I have the benefit of having direct access to that data, so I can be a little more current in terms of the look back. So for me, looking back at 2015 to 2024, I thought was pretty insightful to kind of get that benchmark of where have we come to. So yeah, so very similar KPIs that we're looking at. We just kind of focused on the mortality piece for this talk.
And walk me through what were all of the different phases of production that you were looking at, data points specifically?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I looked at overall sow mortality. Then we looked at litter performance, so total born, live born, percent stills, percent mummies, and then pre-weaning mortality and the trends over those 10 years. And then we break our data out, so the nursery phase, and then the finishing phase, and then those groups that are in a wean to finish type production.
What did your data tell you compared to what the Iowa State data told you?
Certainly we have a problem. Mortality, it is real. It's pretty disheartening when you line those years up that every year you just go a tick higher. But I don't want to lose sight of we do have good things going. I mean, we are farrowing more pigs and getting more pigs to weaning. We are seeing improvements in mortality from the highs that we had a few years ago. So it's not all hope is lost, but we do have a lot of ground to cover.
In both of the data sets that you were analyzing, what maybe surprised you when you were working through those?
I think for me, I was surprised that the pre-weaning mortality didn't have a linear track with total born and live born. Like, we know some of these litter numbers are just massive. Like, it's incredible what our genetics have done. And I came into that data expecting to see a linear increase in pre-wean mortality, and it's not there. I mean, we're doing a good job of getting those pigs to the weaning event.
Yeah, for me, and as I mentioned earlier, I focused on Brazil because Brazil is a major competitor now and emerging as a major competitor, even more significant competitor in the global pork production market. And what really surprised me was the size of the gap in productivity between the U.S. and Brazil. So I Yeah, until I started looking at that, I would not have guessed that ahead of time. Brazil, for example, lags a little bit behind us in born alive per litter, but they make up for that very quickly in pre-wean mortality, and that carries all the way through in the nursery and finishing phase as well. They also, do a little bit better from average daily gain and feed conversion as well. Again, probably because of the lower disease pressure they face. They're not
Because of climate?
Well, they're not disease-free, but they're free of PRRS virus and PED virus. So if you said who's enemy number one in the U.S., I don't think you're going to get a lot of disagreement on that. It's PRRS virus, right? And so they don't have that, right? So that gives them a huge advantage. But even despite that, I still was a bit surprised by the size of that. And then when you start to put a number on that, an economic number on that, then it becomes even more a bit of pull the panic button kind of thing. For me, at least, it did. So yeah, that was probably the biggest surprise for me.
One thing that surprised me was looking at your data year over year. It wasn't linear, like you said. I guess I would expect that in 2015 mortality would be higher because we have access to better technology or genetics or whatever that might be. So I think that was a surprising trend looking at the data points that you highlighted. I know you didn't dig too in depth on what caused that, but overall, I expected the trend to show we were moving in the right direction.
Right. I think that was like some of the first comments after the talk was like, I didn't expect it to just stack up year over year. I mean, yeah, we have a lot of good things going in this industry, but it wasn't reflective in those charts. And it's the disease pressure, like to Derald's point. I mean, PRRS celebrates birthdays on farms now. That's new. That isn't what we were accustomed to 10 years ago. And PED just, I think, kicked us in the shorts when we weren't expecting it. So I think there's just been a lot of those blows more recently. But we're going to get there. We're going to make improvements.
One of the interesting things, too, that came up during the panel discussion of sorts, and when Dr. Johnson was talking about this idea of there's kind of the humane or the herd health side, and then there's also the economic side. So how do you weigh those two factors to determine, and I'm trying to word this in a way that's not inhumane, but essentially how do you decide which pigs to save and put medication or whatever toward versus those that maybe aren't worth saving from an economic and a humane lens?
Yeah, that always is tough, right? And I think, as Dr. Johnson pointed out, that most of the time, if you do what's good for the pig, it's going to be good for the producer, right? And I would like to think that that's true always. The reality is it's not probably there. That's not, that doesn't always hold. But having said that, that does make that decision a little bit easier. But at the end of the day, pig producers have to stay in business, right? And so, economics does come into play. And the reality is, most of the time, if you're making a decision about treatment, no treatment, or vaccine, no vaccine, the economics of that are going to also, the welfare is going to come along with that, right? And so if it's the right thing, again, from an economic standpoint, it's probably going to be the right thing from a welfare standpoint as well. And so, yes, but that always is a tough decision to make. And what makes it even tougher, Delaney, is that you have a lot of people who are making judgments about that don't understand the complexities of that. And so to them, it doesn't matter. They look at something like a sow in a crate and they imagine them being on a plane and for their life, and they think that doesn't look right to me, right? And it doesn't make sense to them. So, that's the reality is we have to deal with that too. It's not all about health and welfare. Let me call it the real. I'm making air quotes around that. It's also about perception, right? So, but yeah, that's a tough one for I think the pig industry to deal with today.
Yeah, for sure. I think we don't have that clean metric of when is a pig worth saving and when is it not. It is such a judgment call. But at the end of the day, we are running a business, and we have to keep that lens on to understand that not all of them are going to make it, and we can't lose productivity for kind of those heartstring kind of decisions. Yeah,
absolutely. What kind of conclusions or takeaways came from each of your analyses, and what would you like to share with the listeners?
I think for me, it was good to see that we're making improvements. 2022 kind of looks like it's the peak. I'll be anxious to get 2025 data in here soon, and hopefully that trend continues. Even though maybe advancements weren't huge, they were down in 23 and 24. So hopefully we've turned the corner on some of these mortality events.
I'm perhaps a little bit less optimistic about that than Rachel, but I've dealt with PRRS long enough to know that when you start feeling good about how things are going with it, that's when you need to worry. And so I think that will continue. In my opinion, I think it's important to keep in mind that in the last 40 years, we have completely changed how we raise pigs. We went, indoors, total confinement, large companies, large farms, segregated production, breed to wean, and move the pigs to nursery finisher or wean to market. And when we did that, we created a system that is incredibly efficient from a cost standpoint. And there's no doubt that we raise pork much cheaper or more, less expensively than we used to, right? And so all those things were good. We need to retain those things. But in the process of doing that, we created a system which is still a biological production system, but we made it very open. And what I mean by that is we're bringing stuff in all the time. On a sow farm, for example, we bring 10 to 20 employees, depending on the size of the farm, or maybe not quite 10, but a lot of employees bringing in feed several times a week. We're bringing in semen several times a week. We're taking out wean pigs several times a week. We're removing calls. We're bringing in gilts. On and on. You get the idea, right? And that's very different from the day when we had small independent producers provide their own labor, probably had an on-site feed mill, raised their own feed ingredients, natural mating, so they weren't bringing in semen. There's still a few of those systems around, and I've done outbreak investigations on those. It's very different, right? You kind of get at the end of it, it's like, well, must be this because you didn't bring, nothing else came in during that time, or very little came in and out. So it's, we have to recognize that we are dealing with a different beast than we had 40 years ago. And I think we've got to get a handle on that, right? Still retain some of those efficiencies, like having a fleet of trucks instead of a dedicated trailer or truck for every farm, right? Credible efficiencies around that, but we have to be able to do that in a way that's not moving pathogens around, because every time something comes into a farm, every time something enters, there's an opportunity to bring a pathogen in, right? And so we've got to get better at identifying what aspects of that production process are creating the biosecurity hazards that are leading to those outbreaks. And then once we understand that in a more comprehensive way, then we can start to prioritize those and say, okay, this is what we need to focus on now, because that's the biggest gap we have today here, right? And then it's not just a simple matter of saying, well, we just need to do these biosecurity practices and we'll be good. No, you have to monitor and be able to control those, right? There's going to be things that we have to consider critical control points. And by that, I mean the things that we need to get right nearly every time to avoid bringing viruses or pathogens into a farm. And we've got to start doing that better. Today, we kind of leave that to chance for most of the things. Some of the recent work here with tracking vehicles, understanding where they're going and when they enter farms, and using video cameras or cameras to monitor things. Great progress. We need to do more of that, right? And we just need to be able to not only monitor and control those things, but then to collect data on that so that somebody, maybe you or somebody else, can come in later and audit that and say, okay, are those things happening the way we expect them to? So we'll get there. I think we'll get there slowly, but I do see slowly a change in how we approach that. But I do think we need to focus with a lot more energy than we do today on that biosecurity piece, recognizing that we have a completely different industry we're working with there.
What a great conversation highlighting the opportunities ahead for swine producers, the importance of proactive planning and biosecurity measures, and the role data plays in continuing to move the swine industry forward. There were so many valuable discussions at the International Conference on Pig Livability, and we look forward to bringing more of those conversations to you here on the PigX podcast. A special thank you to Dr. Derald Holtkamp and Rachel Johnson for sharing their insights and takeaways, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll be back next month with another timely conversation on all things swine. Until then, I'm Delaney Howell, and this has been the PigX podcast.
PigX is a national podcast hosted by the Pig Livability Project partners at Iowa State University, Kansas State University, and Purdue, and supported by the Iowa Pork Industry Center. For more information on the project, head to www.piglivability.org, or to inquire directly with questions regarding the project, email ipic.iastate.edu. PigX, ideas in the swine industry worth sharing.